DevOps for Drupal and other web applications. This is Drupaldelphia 2019. I just did this slide, but for those who just stepped in, I'm Jason Moore, Senior Systems Engineer at ZivTech here in Philadelphia. You can find me online pretty much anywhere as Skills. I'll probably try and put at least some of this material on my website. I have a few tools on there already, but basically that's just a place I put all my additional thoughts and different things I'm working on. As I said, I work at ZivTech. We're based out of Center City. We're an open source innovation company. We do pretty much anything Drupal related or website related. Do a lot of open source work, and we work with a lot of nonprofits. So today's session, basically I'm going to go over a lot of tools and some techniques that you can use to make your DevOps at your organization a little bit easier to manage. So we're going to go over some DevOps philosophy, dev environments, workflows, and tools, automation, testing, CI, and Sandbox tools, server configuration management and provisioning, monitoring, alerts, backups, and security, and then at the end we'll go over some examples and then any questions that you guys may have. So DevOps philosophy, what is DevOps? DevOps is more of a mindset than a job description. You'll find that the job description, if you try to write it, you could probably write a novel about it. So it's more about these different concepts and strategies that you want to try and invoke inside your organization to make things easier to manage. DevOps is a team effort to avoid a single point of failure. You don't want to have just one person in your organization that knows everything about the servers. You might want to have at least two. And so this also distributes the load and nobody gets burned out. Or at least that's the plan. Identify DevOps assets on your team. So play to the strengths of the people on your team. You don't want to put your front-end developers on server administration unless they really want to. So DevOps is not for everyone. Like I said, you want to play to the strengths of the people on your team. You don't want to be forcing people to do things that they're not comfortable with. This could end up with a lot of errors, or you could have downtime. Nobody wants that. DevOps is also a long-term investment in your infrastructure. It's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have many meetings about how you want to structure things, how you want to build things out, and ultimately it's going to change as new tools come out and as your organization kind of grows within the DevOps philosophy, so to speak. So let's look at some common DevOps goals that pretty much we're looking to achieve here along the way. So we want to avoid the "it works on my machine" problem, where you might run into somebody gets a hold of you, they're doing something on their local, but they're working in MAMP and they're working out of FTP from the server and all this kind of stuff where they're not getting a full picture of how it even would work on the production server, really. So you want to avoid this, so we're going to work to try and make standardized systems to do these things. We're also going to automate repetitive tasks. We shouldn't be redoing things over and over again. There's many ways that we can automate things, whether it be with just cron or other tools that are out there today. We want to use tests to reduce errors. Everything we do here, we are human, and we do make errors. And so what we want to do is try to use tests to catch these errors before they get to higher up in your development workflow. Everything is in code in a version control system. We don't want to be wondering how this file got there in our code base, where we want to have a history to everything. This is good for not only going back and seeing what the history would be if there's a problem, but it also allows you to identify people on your team that you may need to work with more closely. There's a git blame, not that we really want to place blame on anybody, but it's a good way to find out where something happened in your history to go deal with that problem so that it doesn't happen again. We want to back up all the things. Little broom in the air. Everything should be backed up once you have it even before you have it fully configured to how you want it. You should be backing up as you go. This, we'll get into reasons why in a little bit, but basically it's to make sure that you can come back from a disaster. Document all the things as well. Without good documentation, you really can't have new people come onto your team without having to ramp them up or onto a project or systems in your organization for an undetermined amount of time. If you have good documentation, you'll be able to pass this knowledge set along a lot easier across your organization. And if other people find that there's a missing piece, they can easily update the documentation to fill in that gap. Overall, the biggest thing here is that we want to be proactive instead of reactive. So we're always being proactive about security, new features, new tools. We're always looking for the next best thing, so to speak, to make our jobs easier. Next thing we're going to get into are some concepts around things that you're going to want to work towards to create in your DevOps environment. So first, we're going to look at development environments. Typically, we have a local dev, staging, or test, and live or production. Each one of these environments should match your production environment as much as possible. This way, you reduce the amount of unknown issues that are going to come up when you try to deploy to production. Your local environment should be disposable. If you lose your computer or something happens to your hard drive, overall, you're not going to lose much work if you're using local dev environments properly and you're using version control. You also want to set up deployment workflows to be able to deploy your code through these environments. Typically, you don't want to rely on a developer to have to manually deploy through each one of these. You want to set up some sort of tooling to automate this. Next, we're going to talk about development workflows. One of the most important concepts here is to know your canonical environment. The canonical environment is the environment that you're going to base as the concrete state of your site. So this is typically your production environment, especially for Drupal sites where you have content being added all the time and things like that. It's very difficult to stage content between different environments in Drupal, at least right now. There's a lot of work being done on this, but ultimately, knowing where the canonical environment lives, where your canonical database lives, it's going to save you a lot of headaches. Only bringing your canonical database down from the canonical environment versus sending databases back up. You never want to send a database really back up to the canonical, because then you could be overwriting changes that you don't have saved down yet. We're going to use Git branches for a feature branch-based workflow. Some of you may be doing this already, but I'll go over the basic concept here in a minute. We're going to use a local dev tool to speed up our development process. Some of you may be using a virtual machine or some sort of tailored tool already. I'm going to be going over a few of these tools here in a minute that can really help you both standardize and speed up your local development process. We're going to include our local development config in the repo whenever possible. This is going to make it so that there's no guessing as to when we're going to pull down a new project. How do we set up the local environment, and how do we get to a point where we can develop that we know matches production as much as possible, and we don't have to go through and configure it every time. So what we're going to do is just include that kind of stuff right in the repository, so that each time somebody clones the repository, either it's built into a README or something like that, that we have an internal piece of documentation that's a developer guide that tells us, okay, here's the development process for building this local site. This is how, if there's specific things you need to do, if you're going to run security updates and things like that, you build that right into that document. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try and set up automation wherever possible to make this all kind of flow without even needing to think about it, right? So first, let's take a look at the Git feature branch workflow. Some people who may be working in a small team or just individually may not be using this system yet, but it's a very useful way to, if you are working on a distributed team or a larger team, to isolate the changes that you're making in code and not really step on anybody else's toes so to speak, while you're making these changes. So what we do, we have some sort of a ticket or something in your ticket system. We're going to make some changes to the code base based on our ticket. And then what we're going to do is commit to a feature branch. So we're going to create a branch in Git. And then from there, we're going to call it something reasonably descriptive as the name. It could map directly back to some Jira ticket or something like that. Or it could just be a well-named, okay, thanks. It could just be a well-named branch name where we're actually going to take all that code that we just changed and push our changes to that branch only. And so this branch could be based off of the master branch or some other production branch that you're going to end up merging this into later. But ultimately, each time you want to create a set of changes, you're going to push it to this feature branch that will then end up being merged in later after review. After we get the code reviewed and the branch merged, then we can actually do the release. All right, so let's get into some tools. Ultimately, today I'm going to be covering a lot of different tools during the first half of this, and then I'm going to try and go through a bunch of examples at the end, depending on how much time we have left, to try and show off some of these tools and see how, to show you how you could be using them. So some of you may already be using something like a Vagrant-based virtual machine to do your local development. One of the most well-known virtual machines that is in our community is the Drupal VM. There's a few others. We actually did a roll your own version, so to speak, a few years ago that we actually ended up stop using based on a bunch of other tools that have come out that we don't have to maintain, which is good. So then there's also, after using these Vagrant and VirtualBox virtual machines, we ended up finding that there's this newer style tool available that's a container-based tool that uses Docker. If anybody's been to a Drupal sprint at DrupalCon or at other camp, you've probably heard of DDev. It's actually what they suggest to get set up to do local development with core. It basically spins up a Docker container with the settings you need to get going pretty quickly. Lando is another one that we've used quite a bit at our shop. We actually have interchangeably, depending on who the developer is working on it, whatever they're more comfortable with, we have both the Lando config and the DDev config saved right on our repo. So depending on what they're comfortable with, they can spin it up in whatever they feel like. So after that, we have package tools that give you like a LAMP stack. Some of you who are running Macs, it looks like there's a few Macs in here, you've probably heard of MAMP. That's kind of like the standard Mac tool. WAMP is like the standard Windows tool for that. And then XAMPP is kind of like an open source version provided by Apache Friends that gives you kind of I think it works on both. Others MAMP I think actually works on Windows now too, but typically these tools don't give you a lot of additional tools to go with it. You basically just get your LAMP stack and then you can pile some other stuff on there, but ultimately we went with these container-based tools because we can quickly spin up this environment with the exact settings we need, and then we don't really need to worry about even loading up a whole VM, which can be pretty hefty, especially the Drupal VM, because it really is only set up to run one site at a time. So you're ultimately running a full machine on your machine for each site. And if you're doing the kind of development we do at ZivTech, where you're working on multiple projects at a time, this may not be feasible at all. So the container-based tools, a lot lighter in the overall resource usage on your system, and they run in these smaller containers that really they work on top of the existing kernel. So you're not utilizing a whole other operating system. You're just layering on a couple of literally called layers of the information that or the container data that you need to run. So I ran out of space on this slide. A lot of the other slides I'm actually including links to these tools. I have the links to these dev tools at the end in a resources slide. So I'll have those links that you can get to those pretty easily. Basically, if you were to Google one of the names, you'll find it pretty easily. Each one of the container-based tools has really good documentation, so you can really get started on building your local environment as close to production as possible. Automation. This is a fun one. Who likes to do repetitive tasks? Nope, I didn't think I would see any hands on that. So really what we're looking to do here is eliminate these repetitive tasks, right? So another big thing here in automation is that we want to reduce human error and provide higher quality code to our clients, right? So by adding in tests that are automated on each commit or additional deployment steps that we are running automatically each time we deploy without having to remember them, automation really helps kind of tighten up deployments and other tests that you may be running manually right now. And I'll tell you, it's just a matter of time until somebody's going to forget to run one of those tests and you're going to push something to production and it's going to be a big mess. So on top of that, we want to simplify the complex tasks like a deployment. So now I'm not saying you want to automate all your deployments, but you want to automate steps within the deployment that are repetitive. So you may want to have it so that you have a Jenkins job that's all tooled up, and all you need to do is pick your Git branch and push a button that says, deploy, and that will be your whole deployment process is pressing a button inside your CI tool. That means you don't even need to have somebody like a lead developer being the one that does the deployment. As long as everything's in there and has the tests, if something fails, the deployment doesn't go through, you get a message back on Slack or something like that that says like this didn't go right, then the developer can step in. But somebody even like a project manager or some sort of an intern even could be the ones doing the actual deployment step where they want to put, like we're told, okay, we want to deploy version 1.10. You go, you click the tag, and you're building a parameterized build inside of Jenkins, which simplifies that process. You don't need one of your lead developers to do that deployment anymore. Another thing I mentioned with automation is that you can run tasks when code is committed. Whoops. Uh-oh. Too many clicks. You can run tasks when code is committed, like tests. So a lot of things have like webhooks. Now you can hook into all these different things with your Git repository. But you can also hook into, with the same webhooks, you can hook into your CI tool. So for something like a Jenkins job that you could set up where you could do, so what we do a lot is we do a lot of our work in GitHub and we host on Pantheon. But those two don't really link up directly until you add some sort of tool to kind of get those two repositories to talk. So what we'll end up doing is have some sort of a Jenkins job set up that we will work out of the feature branch that we're working in GitHub. We push our changes to that, somebody reviews it, we merge that to master. Our CI job is looking at the master branch, and anytime a commit comes up to master, it kicks off the job that then says, okay, we're going to take this repository, check out the master branch, and we're going to use the Terminus API to make this all happen to talk to Pantheon, and we're going to send that up to either the Pantheon master branch in your dev environment, or you could also go a step further and even make it kick off what's called their multi-dev site, which you could basically create a new branch inside of Pantheon to test out the site fully before you even push it to their dev branch. The other, that's the last one on that slide, okay. So after automation, let's take a look at some testing tools that we can use to be part of our automation processes to make our jobs a little easier. We're going to do this overall to provide higher quality code. So testing tools, it's a few main categories I picked for this. There's obviously others if you're doing other types of things. But generally, these are the types of tools that we use typically in our development processes. So we have code testing tools, performance testing, visual regression testing, accessibility testing, which is becoming a much bigger thing these days, And we have tools available that are these sandbox testing tools that we can actually spin up a whole site inside and test everything out without getting anywhere near production. So a few code testing tools that we use and the Drupal community at large uses a lot are for testing PHP and other code. So we have Simple Test. It's an older PHP unit testing framework that typically was used back when PHP 4 and 5 were big, and is used by Drupal.org actually to, or at least I think it still uses it, to test Drupal 7 projects. So if you're submitting a patch or a module or something like that, your tests are actually going through the Simple Test framework on Drupal.org. The next one is PHP Unit. That is the updated version, I'd say, of Simple Test. Works with PHP 7 Plus, and actually is the default framework that runs Drupal 8 tests on Drupal.org. So any patches or code that you're pushing to Drupal.org goes through PHP Unit, and you can actually see it run the tests right on the comment you made. Behat is one that we use a lot in our development processes. It's a behavioral testing framework where you can actually write code to do actual steps on your site. So you can step through filling out a form or creating a user or having some sort of administrative step that you want to test to make sure you're not breaking some role each time you push code to the site or something like that. Behat can be used in that process to go through and step through in a fairly readable format, human readable format, to step through processes that you want to make sure work prior to your code going up to production. And then we have lint. That's more, I feel, is more for like JavaScript in most cases, but it's essentially any sort of it's a generalized term basically to describe something a tool that analyzes your code. So you could write a lint tool to analyze your bash scripts or whatever. It's more of a generalized tool name, but there's a lot of different I wouldn't say frameworks, but there's there's a bunch of tools around these that you can find, like JSLint, and there's ones for JSON and things like that you can help get your YAML syntax right and things like that that help a lot, that you can plug these into automated tests and really make sure that each time you're making a change in your JavaScript, or your front-end people are making a change in your JavaScript, they're not breaking some function on the site. And you can use your Behat tests on top of that to make sure that the form still works. Another set of tests that we typically do are performance tests. So you have PHP application performance in this group. We have the web server performance and the website itself. We want to test the performance of that. Performance is a huge factor in website development these days. Google has actually made public announcements on both their main index and the mobile index that site speed and page load times are factored into their actual search engine ranking results. So big news a few years ago when they did it first for the desktop, and then they more recently, over the past year or so, did it for mobile results. So if you're not optimizing your site for mobile at this point, you should. So let's take a look at some of these. PHP testing tools. New Relic is a pretty nice one. If you're a Pantheon subscriber, you actually get a free New Relic account to do application monitoring on your site. Comes with pretty sure it comes with any one of the plans now. And then there's another one that we found over the last year or so called Blackfire that is more of an emerger in this space, and there is a free account available on theirs to do like developer testing and stuff like that. So you can try it out, see how it works, test your application. And these are tools that they kind of have like an agent that runs on your server that just constantly reports back these metrics back to their systems. So you can really find bottlenecks in your PHP performance of your app pretty quickly. Next up, we have server performance testing tools. I guess the oldest and most well-known out of this group is probably Apache Bench, but it is old and doesn't have some of the features of these new ones. Apache Bench is a single-threaded command line tool that can test performance on your HTTP web servers. Keep in mind it's single-threaded, and most of our servers these days are multi-threaded, so it's not that great in today's hosting environments to use this to test performance that well. Siege is a newer tool. It's an HTTP load testing and benchmarking tool. It utilizes multi-threading on a single processor. So if you have a VPS host that has a single processor with multiple virtual cores, this should work okay on that. But if you have a server, if you're running like a dedicated server or something that has two processors on it, it's not going to work right. So then comes the WRK, or work tool, which is a fairly modern HTTP benchmarking tool that utilizes multi-threading, but also, sorry, I read the wrong line there. The Siege tool can be used to do multiple URLs, but is only a single threaded thing as well. The work plugin is actually one that allows the multi-threading on a single core processor. HTTP load is an event-based HTTP load testing tool that can work across a multi-core environment across multiple CPUs. So this one you can actually work on, like if you're running a dedicated server of some sort that has multiple actual physical processors, this would be the tool you want to use, is the HTTP load. JMeter is another nice one. It's a generalized open source testing tool. You can test functional behavior as well as performance under various levels of load on different web applications. Originally, it was just built for testing web applications, but it has also been expanded to be able to test other applications, server services, and protocol types. So you could do even load testing on like your FTP server. Website performance testing. You got most people in here may have seen some of these tools before. The best one that I know to use is the Google PageSpeed Insights. As I said before, Google is actually tracking the performance of your website. So I think the best person to tell you how well that is doing is probably Google. So they have two tools. One is the online tool. I put in some, these are like bit.ly links. I couldn't fit the full link into here, so these are just redirects from our bit.ly account. But the PageSpeed Insights, you basically plunk in the URL of the site and run tests, and it'll come back with both a mobile set of optimizations that you can make to your site for both mobile and desktop. And it gives you kind of a score that you can kind of see how you're doing. So you really want to get the highest score you can on that to ensure that your page load times are something that Google likes. The Google Lighthouse tool is actually a command line tool that runs the same tests as the Google PageSpeed Insights, and it's also the tool that runs the PageSpeed Insights for Google. So it's actually the CLI tool that they use on the back end to run that whole system. One of the ones I used prior to Google coming up with some of these is this tools.pingdom.com. Some of these tests on here are kind of outdated in terms of some of the newer browser technologies out there. So you get some kind of false positives sometimes on the Pingdom tool now, but it's still pretty good as an overall to test like your images and JavaScript and things like that to see how they're being aggregated. Web page tests is one we found over the last couple years that also spits out some really good suggestions on different things you can change on the site. A lot of these have to do with maybe you didn't turn your JavaScript aggregation on, or your CSS aggregation on, or maybe you didn't even turn page caching on. A lot of these things are small settings you can change, but there's also other things that you could change on the server side. Maybe you want to add in some sort of static file caching or compression, things like that, that can also help you identify these problems. GT metrics is another one. It's based around, I think, Google's API, so it has a lot of the similar information that Google provides. Typically, all these, I kind of just use them interchangeably and see what they all report back. If they all look good, then we're getting close. A big thing that we started doing over the last year or so is visual regression testing. You may have tests that run and tell you that, oh, this form doesn't work. Okay, that's great, but did you see that it broke the menu? The code's still there, but it doesn't look right. So a lot of times when you're doing code review and things like that, you don't notice these kind of things. So there's tools out there that you can plug in that allow you to run in conjunction with your other tests, or kick off a completely separate test through an API call, maybe with curl, that sends it out to an external service that runs a whole bunch of tests against it. So I've put a few tools on here that I've used before, and some tools that I'd like to try, actually. So the Wraith one is actually made by BBC News. It's a open source responsive screenshot comparison tool. You could use that in any project you want. Gemini is another one. It's put out by the Yandex team. That is another open source tool for automating visual regression tests for web pages. So ultimately what these tools are doing is you provide it with either a source URL or a source screenshot that you want to have, like, you know this looks good. So then you go and you make some changes and you push your changes up, and then if you did it through automation, you would automatically kick that test off, send the API call that you need to the URL you want to test, and what it's going to do is go through and test that URL or a set of URLs, depending on how you configure it, to verify that, you know, it didn't change the look of it. So you have, you know, a lot of them will just make like a red outline around a spot that doesn't look right. So you get a quick visual cue that, like, wait a minute, this font changed, or, you know, the menu shifted to the left 10 pixels, or whatever it may be. You can see these things very quickly, and a lot of them will actually identify them and send you like a notification if that build kind of failed. So you can set up a lot of other specific tests in some of these to really get an idea of what's going on. The newest one that I really want to try is this Percy.io. I just found this the other day when I was doing these slides, and it looks really neat. It has a free plan and paid plans. I was going to set up a demo for it, but I didn't get that far. But a lot of these are just command line tools that you can either run locally, either install like through npm, or something like that, and you can just run these tests locally right in your ddev or Lando containers prior to, you know, pushing something up to your live site that breaks the whole front page. Next, we have accessibility testing tools. Accessibility has become a growing concern for website developers over the last decade. There are lawsuits all over the country right now for in regards to the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, which require websites to be accessible to those with disabilities. Luckily, there's a growing list of accessibility testing tools out there that we can use as developers to stay in compliance with these laws, or to help our clients stay in compliance with these laws. I really like Tenon.io. It is a paid service, but they have a really robust API, and the interface is really sweet. I'll be showing an example of this one in a few. The Wave WebAIM API, you can use the Wave tool free to use on just going to the website and plunking in a URL to test with. But if you want to use the API, you need to actually pay. They have like a credit system that you, for each API call, it uses a credit. So you pay per API call basically to test for accessibility, and it'll send you like an HTML report back and things like that. Those two both have a nice API that you can call from your automation scripts or one of these Sandbox tools that I'm going to show off later. Dynalytics is a paid tool that uses the Wave WebAIM API as a service, kind of in their own way, and provides a full interface that maps up with all the Wave tests it does. A-Checker is a free service that you can use through their UI or through an API. You do have to register, but the API, using the API itself is free. So you just have to register an account. I don't know, there probably are some sort of limits to the API calls that you can make in an hour or something like that, but I haven't hit any of them yet. So this next one I really like. It's called the A11Y machine. It's an NPM package that you can install pretty easily in any project. And then what you essentially do, or globally on your local, and essentially you run a command to test a specific URL against various WCAG or accessibility standards. And then it actually spits out a directory with a whole HTML site in it that you can click through and look at all the reports and all the things that it came up with, all the URLs. So it's really a robust tool to get if you really need to like show your work for like a government organization or something like that. It really provides the history and some sort of a asset that you can review later if somebody needs to go through that, like some sort of a government organization that checks that stuff. And again, Google Lighthouse is back. Part of the Google Lighthouse tool is accessibility testing. So it just that tool wraps up a lot of what the tests that you really want to do on your website together in one tool. And another thing about the Lighthouse or the PageSpeed site system, it's also now available in the Chrome DevTools. So if you use Chrome as a web browser, actually if you go into the DevTools part there, one of the tabs in that section is now to do like Lighthouse tests. All right, doing okay on time, I think. Pantheon, so we have the Sandbox testing tools. Disclaimer, we built a tool called probo.ci that I'll show off in a little bit, but there's a bunch of other tools, at least in the Drupal space, that solve some of these problems right out of the box, so to speak. You have the Pantheon multi-dev, which I mentioned earlier. I think it's only available for agencies, but it's a very nice tool to allow you to spin up additional environments inside your Pantheon server, the site, that give you additional branches, essentially. You can't really make a branch without it in Pantheon. But you can set one of these up, a multi-dev branch, that spins up a whole other Pantheon site. You can pull in whatever database you need, whatever code base, and then run all your tests inside of that, and then merge it into your dev. Platform is another nice one. Their whole hosting setup is kind of built like this, that you have an interesting kind of like, you have all your environments in one. A nice tool for testing locally, but also has been expanding to allow you to do additional configuration is Open Dev Shop. So you can get, it's at getdevshop.com. There's a whole set of tools that you can essentially set up a full hosting environment that you can run local sites or dev sites or even production sites through it. Tugboat is another kind of a preview tool. You send up you set up a branch or a PR, a pull request, up to one of these to Tugboat, and you can test in a Docker container, essentially, or a containerized setup, all these settings. So you can pile in different steps. You can add your automated tests for accessibility or BHAT tests and things like that, and pile them into this and do a full build that then reports back if any of those steps fail. And that is also what our Probo tool does. Essentially, we have, through feature branches, which I mentioned earlier, each branch that you create and you've had it enabled on the Probo system, you can then set up a full let's say YAML config file that you can build or configure to do a build. And inside that build, you can have these steps that run, that will install the Drupal site or whatever PHP application you want, and then run additional steps on top of that for the other types of tests and things that I mentioned. So server config and provisioning is a big step here to getting into the DevOps nirvana, so to speak. All your server configuration lives in code. We don't want to be going to each server and trying to figure out what we have loaded and things like that. There's tools out there that allow us to set this all up in version control, have our version history, that we don't need to be guessing what's going on when we want to deploy to a new server, or maybe somebody tried to change a setting on a server that might break something. Well, some of these tools, or a lot of these tools, will allow you to basically keep that configuration, because it'll run through the provisioning step every allotted amount of time that you set, so that even if somebody were to change an Nginx vhost or an Apache vhost file, it's not going to allow that to stay that way for long. So if it did break something, 15 minutes later, it automatically changes it back to how you know it is in code. So that goes into provisioning servers from code. All of our servers are now going to be provisioned through a central location that's coming from this repository. This allows us to quickly deploy changes across the whole infrastructure. This could be, either we want to roll out updates from, we just had a big thing where 1404 became end of life. So those running their own servers on 1404 or Ubuntu 1404 needed to update to either 1604 or 1804, or risk having security problems. So having a system where you can configure and provision your servers from code across, quickly across your organization. Essentially, we have a centralized server. It holds the repository and the secrets of different things that we need. That server calls out to a server through an agent and runs whatever the configuration is for that particular server on that server based on its host name and a key pair that it's created when you essentially link the two up. And as I mentioned, it's going to ensure critical configuration cannot be changed, at least for very long. It doesn't fully lock down the configuration to the extent that you can't edit it, but it does make sure that if it does get edited, you can get it back to the state that you know it should be in, so that if somebody is trying to pull a Wild West on you on a server on a Friday afternoon, you're not going to take down somebody's website. If it does go down because they changed something, your provisioning tool is going to run in 10 minutes, and it's going to fix it before you can even debug it. Some server provisioning tools that we've used or we do use. Puppet is the one that we use the most. It's an open source server configuration management tool. It allows you to provision servers and test servers locally in a VM, if you're up for that. And they also have an enterprise version that you can buy to get more support and all that kind of stuff. Ansible is an open source configuration management tool and provisioning tool that can be used to build VMs, servers, or Docker images. I haven't used CF Engine, but it's another well-known tool for this that has both an open source and a paid enterprise version. Just putting a few other on here that I know are used throughout the community. It's not one that I use specifically, but I didn't want to play favorites too much because all of these kind of achieve the same goals. Chef is a paid service. They have a very broad feature set, and they do have, but it's a fairly hefty price tag for that service, I found. And then more recently, I added Docker to this list because you can just use Docker to provision a lot of the services on your servers these days. Server monitoring and alerts. Basically what we're looking to do here with these is reduce downtime, be proactive about resource usage, plan for upgrades ahead of time, and be notified when thresholds are met. The three main components of this are logging, alerts, and graphing. Server logging tools. Papertrail is a nice one because it is a paid service, but it allows you to store your logs off-site. So if you have a very secure server that you want to make sure that the logs cannot be tampered with, you can send these logs to Papertrail, and their system is set up so that you cannot modify a log. Once it's been written, it's written. So that's a good way to have additional auditing on your logs. Logstash is an open source server-side processing pipeline. Basically, it ingests your logs and allows you to aggregate them to various sources. Kibana is a logging and analytics platform. It ultimately was a messaging platform at first, but has ultimately evolved into a full set of tools for visualizing your log data. Loggly is another paid service. It has similar features to Kibana, where you can aggregate and visualize your log data from multiple sources. The messaging and alerts tools are important. Most of these are high availability messaging frameworks that are essentially sending messages from your logs quickly and very low resource usage to some centralized location. We have Sensu, RabbitMQ, and Uchiwa. These all can work kind of interchangeably and talk to each other to send logs wherever you need to. And then if you want to get fancy with it, you can set up some graphing tools. So with the graphing tools, we have Graphite, InfluxDB, and Grafana. Basically, I believe all of these are open source, and they all kind of are trying to achieve the same goals now. So each one essentially started out as its own little component of a system, and they've all kind of evolved into a full suite of logging and monitoring tools. So it doesn't really fit exactly to just say that they're graphing tools. A lot of them are evolving into full monitoring, and they have the graph kind of built in. So one of the biggest crucial one of the most crucial systems to any successful DevOps infrastructure are backups. Backups allow us to recover from catastrophic events, revert to a previous state of the database, or retrieve deleted files that might be missing. It also allows us to build development environments automatically if we have the database backed up somewhere. And I just want to mention that a backup is not working unless you've tested it. Ask MySpace about that. So then we have some backup tools that we've used or we do use. AutoMySQL Backup is the original version has been forked. The one I'm linking to here is the forked version. It's a more up-to-date version. Essentially what it does is allow you to make rolling backups of your databases, and we'll give them like a daily, weekly, monthly schedule that you can set. rsync, many of you may have used before. It's a very powerful tool to back up even locally or remotely files or directories. Git, some of you may be like, why is Git up on this list? But Git can actually be used to make backups. The Git repository itself is a great tool to give revision history to the system. And then essentially what you do is make an empty repository that saves the revision history, and then you rsync that somewhere else to a safe remote location, and then you have essentially the public files backup inside of a Git repository. Duplicity is a nice tool that I found and we've been using on a few things. It's really nice because it automatically encrypts the backup before you send it somewhere. So you set up encryption keys and things like that, and you can send encrypted backups to S3 or whatever remote location you need. Security. We have essentially a few main components here. We want to have password management. We want to look at server security and Drupal security. Basically, there's a handful of password management tools. I'm not going to tell you which one to pick, but you want to pick one. You want to have something like this in your organization, especially if you're currently sending passwords through email or something like that, do not ever do that again. That is one of the main ways that hackers access sites, is just to peruse somebody's email account and find a password laying around. So these tools like LastPass is really good for organizations. You can share passwords, you can set password policies, password reset policies, and ensure that essentially, and you can even set it to make sure that your whole organization is using two-factor auth. KeePass is one that's a local tool, not really great at sharing the information between things. You kind of have to share the main password with other people, which isn't great. But it's great for just a local version of your own, like to keep your own set of passwords locally if you don't need to share them. Dashlane, kind of another like LastPass style subscription service, although there is a free account on there as well for up to 50 passwords. LastPass has a full open free account that you can basically have as many passwords as you want. OneLogin is another subscription service. They kind of are pushing their service as a full single sign-on setup. So they're pushing kind of like you never have to remember another password ever. It just is all handled through their one password. The next that goes into 1Password, another subscription-based service. They promote themselves as a password manager for families, businesses, and teams. So they're kind of trying to solve all the problems there. And then I found an open source tool. I haven't tried it, so don't sue me. But it's an open source tool called Bitwarden. And there is some sort of a paid version available, but you can run it on your own server. I have not tried it, so try at your own risk. But it looked pretty neat, and I'm going to try it. Server security tools. Some of you may be familiar with IP tables. If not, there's the man page. You should get familiar with it if you are running servers. You're going to want to make sure that you are locking down your servers to only allow the ports open that you want. You don't want to allow people to be able to sniff around and find ways into your server. Another way to keep people out of the server is with SSH authentication. You want to not be using passwords, especially root user passwords, to get onto your server. You want to be able to set up SSH authentication and use an SSH key to do your authentication with your users. Fail to ban is a nice tool that we use at ZivTech for the servers that we manage. Ultimately, it scans your logs for shady-looking, repetitive entries, whereas if somebody's trying to log into your server with the root user and they keep failing, it's going to automatically ban that IP for a certain amount of time. You don't even have to think about it. And you can just basically tell it what services, what logs to look at. You can create custom logs that you can look at other stuff and have it check those. So a very robust tool to keep the bad guys out. So that takes us to Drupal security tools. We have the core update module, which everybody should have enabled on their sites. It's been around since Drupal 7 in core, and was the update status module if you're still using Drupal 6. I would definitely recommend turning that on if it's not. You can also go in there and set up a email address to send you notifications if there's a specific module on your site that has an update. As long as your email is working on your site and you have a cron job, or at least a poor man's cron running that will actually kick off a cron job, it'll send you an email to let you know every day if you have it set. Drupal security announcements, drupal.org/security is your central spot to find anything related to Drupal security. There's mailing lists there that you can set up, get on your Drupal user profile, and you can set up the security newsletter for both core and contrib, so you can get emails directly from the security team when those are going to go out. There's also some nice PSA emails that come out, like we got one the other day before this random Drupal core update on a Wednesday in the first week of the month. They're typically on the third week of the month, so they send out like a PSA to let you know, like, hey, just to let you know, there's going to be a security update in 2 days. Password policy module is really important for sites that have users outside of even administrative users, to make sure that all your users have at least some sort of a reasonably secure password. You can set a bunch of conditions And if they don't meet those conditions, they can't set that password until they meet the conditions. And then we have the Drush security audit module. This module is more of a Drush plugin and can be used through command line to run a full set of tests through like a site audit. The Drupal security audit one specifically reports back any security issues. Is very useful in sites that got attacked by the Drupalgeddon attack. Live examples. All right. Sorry for going so deep into all that real quick, but let's take a look at some of these tools that I've kind of gotten ready here for you. I'm going to change my mode. All right. So, I'll blow that up a bit. So just to go over a few, why is that so small? All right. So I wanted to show off just a few things with the local dev tools. So this one is the ddev tool. So if I do a ddev list, can you blow that up a little more? So this is listing out any ddev containers I have running right now. So I have this one that I made specifically for this presentation, and I have that up over here with the umami profile. And all I did to get this going was, so ddev basically if you just type ddev, gives you all the commands you can do. All I did was ddev start after I basically downloaded the Drupal core and went through the install process, and I installed the umami profile on this. And this is running off a Docker container on my local machine. So I had a couple other things I wanted to show. So I used the composer create project command. If anybody's still using just Drupal.org downloads to build their Drupal sites, you want to get into using Composer. Most of these local dev tools have Composer components built in. So if I wanted to do a ddev Composer require Drupal path auto, that's going to call the ddev container and run Composer inside the container and go out to the Drupal Composer and grab the Composer repository and grab the path auto module and install it in our site. And it'll update our Composer JSON file and all that. And then if I wanted to go over, I think I need the token module actually to still install it, but if I was to go over to my Drupal site there, I can get that running. Lando is another one. My Lando example didn't go so hot, but I did go through, and so the A11Y tool, I already ran it. It takes a few minutes to run, but I did already get a report generated here. So I generated a report. I thought I did. Hold on. Oh, I did it in the Lando one. Whoops. All right. So a little confusing there. Sorry. I ran this A11Y report, and so this is kind of what that looks like. I ran that just off the Drupal 8.7.1 core that I had installed, and it ran through the available links that were in the on the site code already. So it tries to traverse the site as much as possible. And so this is the report that you get back, and it tells you okay, these are the errors. Very helpful. You can just spit this report out and zip it up and send it to your CI or however you want to do it. Send it to your, attach it to a ticket for your front-end devs or whatever. And this can all be tooled into one of these Sandbox tools, which I'm just going to try and do real quick. Oh, I did want to show off the Tenon interface as well. Oh, crap. See if it just lets me in. Yay. I was going to have to, two-factor. All right, so this is what a typical report looks like on Tenon. You can just plunk in a URL here, so if I wanted to, I'm not going to be able to get to my local one, but if I wanted to do, let's do the Drupaldelphia sessions page. I might get yelled at for this, but we'll see. So this is just going to analyze that page, and then it's going to spit back a report based on the WCAG 1.0, 2.0, all the different tests or I guess they're standards available, and then spits out a really nice report, line by line errors, where they're at, what to do. And this can be called through an API call. So you could send this off from a CI job or, from from your Jenkins server or something like that. And so that brings me to our tool that we built to kind of wrap a lot of this up. It's called Probo. And I have a few tests here. I can do the, let's see. I forget which ones work, so let's just try one. So essentially, the Probo system is configured through a YAML file. Here's what a typical YAML file looks like. You can define, oh, that's really small, sorry. You can define an image that essentially is a Docker image. Right now, we only use whitelisted ones that we've actually created. And then you can run commands. So we have a step here called Update Composer. We're going through and running actual commands inside the container to update the Composer version. Then we're going to do a Composer install inside the doc root. And then we also have a plugin for Drupal that allows us to quickly set up some Drupal-specific settings, like a settings file to require, or the doc root itself, clear the caches, things like that that are Drupal-specific. We can do that right with the plugin. So if I were to go back here and take a look at the pull requests I have, oh, my pull request is broken. All right, that's a bad example. Let me go to a different one. I'm pretty sure this one works. So, typically, you'd make the pull request. Once you make your commit, each commit that you make goes through the Probo steps that you've defined. So, on the first commit, I had a couple problems. Then I got it fixed on the third one here. So if I go over to details, well, it prints out what those steps response was. So this one's provisioning a Drupal site. Check in to see if a package is installed. If we click details here, similar to if you've used like circle.ci or something, it takes you over to the app. And in here, it reiterates those steps that we build out, and we can see if something went wrong. Here's all the steps that it's doing to build our Drupal site. Updating Composer. Then down here, I'm just doing a simple check to see if a package is installed as a step, just as a test. But you could tool in just about anything here. One of the demos that I have over here actually is a integration with the Tenon tool. And that's actually the site, this actual build right here is the one that actually kicked off that API call to the site we looked at on Tenon. So if I actually go in here, since it's just a commit change, if I go into the actual I have to make that a little smaller so I can see what I'm doing for a sec. So if I actually just go into this pull request, and I'm just going to edit this file. Whoops, wrong edit. Can I edit it? Okay, edit file. So I'm just going to do this right on the fly, and I'm just going to remove this because I think that's what I've been doing back and forth. Update, build. I'm going to submit that. And now over here, on the actual pull request, we're going to see that it's starting to run this build. Uh-oh. I wonder if my account lapsed. Well, in that case, we'll do a different one. So you can sign in with GitHub. We just got a GitLab integration set up. Also, you can use Bitbucket. I'm going to go to this one we used for our DrupalCon training the other week. This one should work. So this is the interface. You get the commit that you sent in. You can click over to check the pull request again. You have the branch. And then you can actually rebuild this if you wanted to for some reason, or you can pin it so that even if you make additional commits later to this, you can come back and review this specific build. Like if there's something weird happened in it and you want to check it later, you can do that. We also have a new set of functions here where you can actually hop into the container in a terminal or check your logs. So let's just take a look at this site. Should still be there. Oh yeah, this one has nothing in it, right? Oh, this is just checking the connection. Whoops. I'm hoping there's another pull request here. So this is a pull request that it's not actually doing it. Man, I had better examples for this last time. I lost them all. All right, here's a good one. So we actually have the Sorry, I thought I had a better example here. Give me 1 second. Oh, I'm on the ZipTech one, that's why. So I have one for a Jekyll site. We actually, our front end for our docs website, the Probo docs, is built using Jekyll. And we actually have a Probo build that tests all this prior to us deploying it. So we're testing Probo docs with Probo. And so this one right here, I'm not sure what, this is probably just a very generic install of a Jekyll site. It's an old build, but hopefully it exists. So what happens is sometimes these containers go to sleep because it's a Docker container, and they'll actually, to save resources, we put them to sleep. So you might have to like click the page again. That's interesting. How did I get to that? Oh, I clicked the wrong link. So this is the sample Jekyll site that I built, and it's basically just going in a couple steps, installs the npm, does an npm build or a Jekyll build, and then spits out the site. I use just a very simple demo project for that. So we do like the raw. So if we were to just look at the contents of this one, so the steps here are we're building a LAMP app, so that's one of the other plugins that we have. And then we also have a script plugin that allows you to run like multiple commands. The command plugin is just one command. The script plugin allows you to just add additional commands as parts of this array here. So we're installing ImageMagick, which is like a dependency. We're installing Ruby inside the container to update it. And then down here, we're just building the Jekyll site itself with the build exec Jekyll build. And then we're copying that to the destination that would typically be the site root for the Drupal site, or just any site in the Provost system, which is var www.html. And with that, let me make sure I got through all my... Right, and so again, just to reiterate, the Drupal security stuff is important. If you don't have the update status module on or the update module on, please turn it on. It will help you immensely stay out of problems with security. And let me hop back to this. And any questions on anything from anybody? I know a couple people already left, but I was just trying to go through some more examples. Yeah? So they're kind of separate. The Provo tool is basically attaching similarly to how Jekyll would or Jenkins would to your repository. So there's a webhook that when you create your Provo account, when you attach it to your repository, it creates a webhook. But then that webhook is essentially doing the same kind of thing. It's looking for a commit, and then it's going to tell Provo, like, oh, kick this off. So they can work in conjunction with each other, for sure. I mean, I don't see there being any reason to do like one or the other. We use Provo more for testing versus like with Jenkins, we use it more for just straight up automation of tasks. So like we don't regular cron jobs, we kick off cron through Jenkins. So we have a history of every time it does a build, which is essentially the cron job, we can see like what it did, and if it came back with like a failed cron, we can go back and look at that Jenkins job and say, oh, job number 4,559 or whatever says that there was an error. We can go look at the console output in the Jenkins job of what returned and gave the error. So they can work, I say they work together, depending on how you're going to do it. But yeah, ultimately you could have something, I ended up using Jenkins to kind of build a master project for another session or a training that I did previously, where I used the Jenkins job to kind of build a directory that was multiple repositories without using like Git submodules. I just pulled them in individually, and then I used that. Once I pushed to that repository, it kicked off with the Jenkins webhook to actually do something on GitHub that like pulled it back down. So it's really how you want to tool it up. And I think with tools that are the Sandbox tools, they're more for like testing, whereas like Jenkins or a Circle.ci, they're more for like automating tasks. Anybody else? All right, thank you very much. I know there was like a couple spots there where I was getting lost in my examples there. I apologize. I'll try to polish those up a little bit more next time. And I do have this resources slide if you're looking to find more about DDev, Lando, Drupal VM. I also found this one called Devilbox, where it sounds mean and nasty, but it's actually pretty cool. It's another Docker-based one, but works more like a MAMP, where you have more of like a UI to handle it all. So kind of the best of both worlds. Lando and DDev are currently CLI only, but I believe Lando, or one of them, is getting some sort of a UI soon. Thanks, everybody.